They say, united we stand and divided we fall. Well, as a US citizen, you stand with a nation of innovators and change makers, all working together to provide a bright future for the next generation. Hello, and welcome back to episode 3 of Civics IQ, presented by GovDogs. In episode 3, we're diving into a topic that is not only important, but also a dream for many around the world: US citizenship and types of government. Stay tuned till the end for a bonus citizenship fact. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, and if you found value in today's video, please consider giving it a like. All right, let's get into citizenship, naturalization, the duties and responsibilities of citizens, and types of government. Okay, so let's get into our discussion about American citizenship and what it means to be an American. So, what does it mean to be a good citizen? Go down in the comments and drop an example of how you displayed good citizenship or how someone that you know has displayed good citizenship. I'm actually very interested to see what you guys put down there. So let's talk about immigrants. So what is an immigrant? An immigrant is a person who moves to a country permanently, all right? If I move to Italy for 2 months, am I an immigrant? Probably not, because after that 2 months, I'm headed back to the US, right? So immigrants specifically move to a country permanently. They are not on vacation. They are not there on a work visa. Right? Historically, a lot of American families have immigrated to the United States, and I'm sure that you can go back and think of maybe your heritage or somebody that you know's heritage and how that relates to immigration patterns. Here are some early immigration statistics, okay? Obviously, the first people that were on the continental US were Native Americans, all right? They came from Asia. This migration happened over thousands of years ago, and they crossed what's known as the Bering Land Bridge, okay? So the area between Alaska and Russia was actually formed over to create a land bridge, which the earliest Americans crossed over and actually settled in the continental US. So here's a picture of the Bering Land Bridge. So as you can see, in the northern area, right, Alaska area, Russia area, there was continental ice that allowed people to transport themselves, their goods, their families, all of their supplies from Asia into the continental North American continent, all right? And this is how the first people arrived in the continent of North America. So here are some Native American tribes. If you take a look at the map, based on the location, there are a bunch of tribes. Their homeland security, fighting terrorism since 1492. All right, just to highlight the fact that Native Americans, yes, were the first people that were on the continental US. They are the originals. So European settlers are probably a group of settlers that we are most familiar with if we look back into our schooling and maybe some of our heritage. So first, the Spanish settled in the 1500s, mostly in Florida and the Southwest. The first and the earliest settlement was actually in the state that I live in Florida, in St. Augustine. So if you ever visit St. Augustine, they're very fond of telling you that this is the first settlement in the Americas, and they would be right. I think they actually have the oldest street in America as well. So English set up colonies along the east coast of America, which we all know were the original 13 colonies, but many other countries did colonize the US at some portion early on. So here is the fort in St. Augustine, and again, this is the oldest city in the United States. So African Americans did not come here by their own will, all right? So the migration patterns of African Americans obviously did not fit those of their white counterparts or the Native Americans who were on the continent before anybody. They were captured normally by their own people in Africa and sold into the slave trade. So Asian Americans start coming over a little bit later than European settlers. So gold's discovered in California in 1848. Because of Asia's close proximity to California, a lot of Asian migration started to occur, and they mostly came from China, okay? And the purpose of this migration was to find gold, start a better life, etc., okay? So it's very similar to the East Coast migration through Ellis Island. Asian Americans went through Angel Island in San Francisco. Here is a ad advertising the fact that California has a bunch of gold. Just a good primary source to kind of wrap your head around what was going on in California at this time. So Latino and Hispanic Americans, okay, begin arriving at the latest out of all of these ethnic groups that we're talking about, the later 1900s, okay, from the 70s, 80s, 90s, etc. So normally Texas, southern interior, western Florida. And if you take a look at the geographic positioning of Florida compared to Latin America, it makes sense that a lot of these populations are immigrating to places in the South. Okay, many come from Latin American countries, and they're predominantly searching for a better life, better wages, safety sometimes. So there's a lot of reasons that people immigrate to the United States, and this is definitely highlighted with the Latino/Hispanic American ethnic group. So here are some reasons why you would want to immigrate to the United States. Number one is resources. 2 is living conditions, and 3 is better wages. A lot of times these 3 things kind of intertwine with each other. If you have better wages, you can afford better resources and your living conditions are better. If you have better living conditions, mostly your resources are going to be better, and that'll allow you to focus on maintaining better wages. So these 3 things are very intertwined, but they are all reasons why people would immigrate to the United States in the first place. So who makes up the American population? I mentioned briefly ethnic groups, so let's define that quickly. An ethnic group is a group of people who have the same race, culture, and nationality, all right? So if you take a look at the breakdown here, okay, the United States is predominantly white, the Hispanic population is definitely growing, multi-race is a smaller portion, Asian a smaller portion, Native people very small, and African American small as well. So let's talk about values and institutions. These are 2 important vocabulary words that sometimes can get misconstrued, but I'd like to define them for you now. So values are principles or beliefs people use to make judgment or decisions, okay? So here are some values that Americans share: freedom, justice, democracy, etc. So you might not steal from a store because you believe in justice, right? That's not the right thing to do. I'm not going to do it. You might vote in elections because you believe in democracy, right? So values really just guide your judgments and your decision making. Institutions are an important practice, relationship, or organization, and in American culture, family is the most important institution. So we also have government institutions. So these are based on American values. So we have the right to make our own choices without interference from the government, and this is popular sovereignty, okay? The idea that government gets its power from the people. So all of the politicians that are in Washington, D.C., all of your local politicians, right? They get their power because you voted them in, right? So the idea of popular sovereignty is the idea that the power of the government lies within the people, okay? We get to choose our leaders. They have no power unless we put them in power. Okay, let's continue our conversation about citizenship, specifically talking about the naturalization process and what naturalization is. So, if you are an American citizen, you have the following thing. This is a passport, okay? So passports are only issued to US citizens. This is one of the privileges of becoming a citizen, and you must carry these outside of the US basically to prove your identification, and especially to get back inside of the US once you arrive from whichever country you were visiting. So here's an image from a naturalization ceremony, okay, where legal immigrants officially become US citizens. So there is a bit of a grace period before you can become a US citizen. You can't directly become a US citizen just by signing some papers, and we're gonna get into that process now. So let's briefly go over the definition of citizenship and what makes a citizen. So by definition, a citizen is someone who has citizenship or is a legal member of a state or a country, okay? In this circumstance, we're talking about the United States. What is a citizen? So in the United States, a citizen is a person who has been born in the United States or has gone through the naturalization process. Also, if they have relatives who are American citizens, which we will get into soon. So you have the law of blood and you also have the law of soil. So the law of blood says the following: being born to a mother who is a US citizen. So if your mom is a US citizen, congratulations, you are also a US citizen. Doesn't matter where you're born, doesn't matter when you're born. If your mom's a US citizen, you are as well. Now, the law of soil is being born inside of the continental United States, okay? So if you were born in any of the continental United States or any of their territories or even a military base controlled by the United States, that is American soil, you are a US citizen. So let's go through the naturalization process. When somebody naturalizes, this is the process of them becoming a legal immigrant into a legal citizen, becoming a US citizen, okay? Obviously, an immigrant is someone who comes to a country permanently. There are also people who are considered aliens. So aliens are people living in the United States who are not citizens, not green people from other planets, okay? Aliens in this scenario are people legally or illegally living in the United States. So an alien can be in the United States for temporary purposes. Sometimes it's for a work visa, sometimes it's for a visit, etc. Legal aliens have legal permanent residency in the United States. Obviously, an illegal alien has not properly crossed into the United States, and that's a different story. So in order to naturalize, you must fit the following criteria. Number 1, you must be 18. Number 2, you must have already been granted legal permanent residency or become a legal alien. 3, have continuous residency in the United States for at least 5 years. 4, be of good moral character. 5, be able to speak and read basic English. 6, demonstrate knowledge of the U.S. history and government by passing an exam. Be faithful to the principles of the United States Constitution. Have a favorable disposition towards the U.S., and take the oath of allegiance, okay? So number 1 is pretty self-explanatory. You need to be 18. Becoming a legal alien as well is pretty self-explanatory. You need to live in the U.S. for 5 years. Be of good moral character, meaning that you are not trying to, actively commit crimes or something like that. Read and speak English, demonstrate knowledge of US history and government, be faithful to the principles of Constitution. So you need to be able to kind of prove that you are able to uphold the principles of the Constitution. So have a favorable disposition towards the US. This means that you have to like the US, all right? You can't come here and hate the United States and then expect for them to allow you to naturalize, all right? You need to actually show that you like the United States. And then you finally take an oath of allegiance, okay? So you are basically pledging your allegiance to the United States as a newly naturalized citizen. So I want you to take a look at these 3 questions. How would you describe the process of becoming a naturalized citizen? What do you think it means that people choose to go through this process? And what do you think the impact of the naturalization process is? I'll wait for you. Drop those answers in the comment box below. So here are some impacts of naturalization. So states that have high percentage of naturalized citizens may be impacted by the following. Remember, this is a generalization, okay? Population diversity. If there are more immigrants coming from, or more naturalized citizens coming from other areas, chances are that your state's gonna be more diverse. All right, more naturalized citizens that are the following: owning businesses, working for the community, running an office, and also voting. So candidates running for office will typically become familiar with the background of the voters where they're seeking office, right? So remember, popular sovereignty, the power of the people to elect their representatives. This is a good example of that. If you're running for office, you should probably understand who your voters are and relate your message to them so that they vote for you. So due to the fact that almost 20% of voters in Florida were either naturalized or born of immigrant parents, candidates would likely focus on those issues to gain their vote. Okay, for example, a candidate might talk about immigration policy as a way of gaining support. Let's talk about the duties and responsibilities of US citizens. Now, duties and responsibilities are 2 things that can get misconstrued pretty easily, but there are some specific differences which we'll highlight in this section. So here is a list of legal citizens' duties. So each of us belongs to many communities, right? You belong to your neighborhood, maybe your town or your city, your school, your church, your state, and obviously your country. As community members, we have many responsibilities. These are things that we should do, or obligations we fulfill voluntarily. Now, if you do not do these certain responsibilities, all right, there is no actual punishment for you, right? There might be social punishments. People might think that you're not the nicest person, or maybe that you don't care about your community, but there aren't any fines or jail time associated with not completing your responsibility, just social ramifications. So as citizens, we also have duties. These are things that we are required to do. Okay, we must fulfill duties at the national, state, or local level, or face fines or imprisonment, right? So the main difference between a duty and a responsibility is that if you do not complete your duty, you face fines or imprisonment. If you do not complete your responsibilities, yes, there might be some social penalties, but you're not gonna go to jail and you're not gonna get fined. Here are some duties. Number 1, obey the law, all right? Obviously, if you do not obey the law, you're facing fines or imprisonment. 2 is pay taxes, same thing here, okay? You can get fined or you can go to jail if you do not pay your taxes. These are things that are mandatory, they are not optional. 3 is defend the nation, right? If we have a selective service in the United States, if you are called to defend the nation, it is your duty, right? Meaning that it is mandatory that you serve in the US Armed Forces. Jury duty, number 4, serve in court, all right, is also mandatory. So if you are called to jury duty, you are obligated to fulfill that requirement. Number 5, attend school. So most states make you attend school until you're 16 years old. After that, you can normally make the choice whether or not you want to continue your education. But this is a duty. If you are not in school and you are below the age of 16, that is something that is illegal, and there might be some penalties for that. Now let's talk about some civic responsibilities. Number 1 is to be informed, okay? You should know what your government is doing so that you can make the best decisions that affect you directly. So in order to do that, you need to be informed, you need to know what's going on. You can learn about issues by reading print publications such as newspapers, listening to news on the radio or TV, podcasts, internet searches, listening to videos like this. All of those are resources that you can use to be better informed. Also, you need to make sure that you know your rights, okay? So videos like mine are an excellent way to understand your rights and to better be informed as a US citizen. Speaking up and vote is another important responsibility, right? Remember, the government exists to serve you. Popular sovereignty. You give power to the government, okay? You can also speak up by doing the following: calling, writing, or sending emails to your elected officials, airing your grievances, letting them know what your concerns are, or maybe letting them know what you think they did proper. And the number 1 thing is voting, all right? Now, voting is a responsibility, it is not a duty. So if you do not vote, you do not get penalized, right? All American citizens should vote. It's one of those things that makes becoming an American citizen so important. So because we have the power to vote, we should all be using it. But again, if you don't vote, that is no penalty, there's no fine, there's no imprisonment. Respecting each other's rights is another important responsibility. property rights as well as the property of others. So, if you are respecting rights, okay, you are not physically assaulting somebody, you are not messing with their property. Vandalizing and littering are not only disrespectful, but they're also a crime, okay? So this kind of ties into following the law, respecting people's rights. Respecting diversity, okay, being tolerant of differences, respecting other differences, and the best thing that you can do with somebody who disagrees with you is talk to them, right? Understand why they disagree with you, and that not only can reinforce your argument, but it can also maybe give you some insight onto why they think certain things and could potentially change your mind. So it's very important as Americans that we have civil discourse. We can talk to each other about difficult issues without getting upset, without getting angry, without getting personal, and we can kind of, show our point of view and hopefully receive the person that we're talking to's point of view as well, to kind of come to some common ground, or at least mutually respect that we do have differences. Those differences are going to be prevalent in a free society. Also, contributing to the common good, all right? So time, money, and effort, right? So time, you could be volunteering at a homeless shelter, okay? Effort, maybe you're cleaning up trash on the sidewalk, okay? And money, you could donate to certain charities and things like that. It's important to be an active member in your community. So many Americans do volunteer work to help their community. What a community is by definition is a group of people who share the same interests or concerns. Many volunteers today are students between the grades of 6 and 12, so middle school and high school students make up a large chunk of volunteers in the country. Unfortunately, once we get a little bit older, sometimes that volunteer time definitely starts to diminish. So it's important that not only do you do this in middle school and high school, but you carry this on throughout your life as well. Government does exist to serve the people, but unfortunately, government's resources are limited. So governments are what we call bureaucracies. These are complex systems with many departments, rules, and people in a chain of command. Think about the government like a skyscraper, okay? You must enter that concern on the bottom floor, okay? Then it has to go to the second floor. Then somebody on the third floor gets it. Somebody on the fourth floor gets it. Finally, it reaches the top floor of that skyscraper, right? And the person that can actually help you and make the decision gets to do so, all right? So think of governments just like a skyscraper. You put your concern on the first floor, but not till it gets to the top floor does anything get done. They're very inefficient, they are very slow, and it takes a very, very long time, right? So this is why it's so important to have strong community ties, right? To be active in your community, to be helpful in your community. Because chances are, the thing that you're asking the federal government to do can be solved on the community level if you know where to go. Just as a general rule, good citizens of the United States are concerned with the welfare, health, and prosperity of all members of their community. Okay, some people participate in the community by leading scout troops, other mentor children, okay, nursing homes, collecting canned goods. An example is the PTA, okay? That's a really good way for parents to get involved in their school community. Volunteerism, by definition, is the practice of offering your time and services without payment. Instead of their time, a lot of Americans contribute money to charity, all right? So that is another way of getting involved in your community. In 2005, more than $250 billion were given to charity, and on average, the Americans spend about 2% of their income on charity, okay? Most charity comes from regular individual citizens, but some donations obviously come from large corporations as well. Many companies also believed in giving back to the community. So an example would be sponsoring a recreational sports team, donating prizes for a community fundraiser, contributing to scholarship funds and things like that. So if you've ever been to a Little League baseball field, a lot of times local businesses will sponsor some of those teams and put their advertisements on the back of the shirt. Things like that are a good way of donating your money to get involved in the community and to help out. So like I mentioned a little bit earlier, okay? The majority of volunteers in the country are middle school and high school students. Okay, so more than half of U.S. middle schools and high schools now arrange community service. Several hundred school districts now require students to volunteer to get a high school diploma. So schools are really pushing this idea of community involvement. It's a really good idea. Get kids out in the community, get them helping out people who are in need. Hopefully that translates to the students continuing that volunteerism once they graduate high school, move on to college, and move on to the real world. All right, so let's talk about types of government. So let's first talk about classifying governments, all right? So is it a monarchy or a republic? What you should ask yourself is who makes the rules? Is it a lifelong leader or an elected representative? Okay, is it a lifelong leader? That would be a monarchy. If it's an elected representative, that is going to be a republic. Here are some key aspects of a monarchy, okay? Has a king or a queen, an empress, or an emperor? The ruling position can be passed onto the family members of the ruling person. In some traditional monarchies, the monarch has absolute power, which we will get into. But a constitutional monarchy, like the UK, also has a democratic government that limits some of the monarch's control. Okay, so it kind of sounds counterintuitive, right? A constitutional monarchy, but we'll get into the specifics a little later on. A republic is a country that has no monarch. The president is elected, okay? A republic means that it is a representative democracy. We elect people to represent us, okay? So a republic is a democracy, a monarchy is a dictatorship, democracy or dictatorship. Ask who holds the power. Is it the people or is it a small group of leaders? In a democracy, the government is elected by the people. Remember popular sovereignty, right? This idea that the power comes from the people. This is an example of democracy, okay? People get elected to represent us, okay, and work on our behalf. Everyone who is eligible to vote has a chance to have their say on who runs for the government. Dictatorships are ruled by one singular leader. This leader has not been elected and a lot of times uses force to keep control. In a military dictatorship, the army is in control, and this is an example of an authoritarian government, right? Think of authority. What is authority? People who make the rules. So an authoritarian government is a government that is ruled as a dictatorship. One person or a small group of people are going to have the authority over the entirety of the country, and they make the rules. Unitary or federal. Ask whose authority is limited. Is it regional governments or central government? An example of a unitary government would be the UK. The central government has a lot of power. The regional governments have very weak authority. Federal is an example of the United States. Central and state governments share authority. Remember, we are a federalist system. We'll get to that in a future video. And a confederation is independent states that agree to certain limitations on their freedom. This is how Switzerland worked, okay? This is also how the US worked under the Articles of Confederation. Obviously that didn't work out. And again, that'll be a video for the future. So parliament or president, ask who is in charge. Is it the legislative branch or is it an elected president? A parliamentary system is present in the UK, all right? The monarch does not make policy, but he or she is a figurehead, okay? So the king and queen in England don't make policy per se, but they are a representation of the historical monarchy in England. This is a form of a constitutional monarchy, but don't get it twisted, Parliament definitely makes the laws. An absolute monarchy, the supreme power is in the hands of one specific ruler, okay, normally passed down through generations. In Saudi Arabia we have this. And then a constitutional monarchy, okay, the monarchy is guided by a written constitution that lists laws and responsibilities, Japan, Bhutan, UK as well. Now, there are certain types of republics, okay? A representative democracy is what we have in the United States. We elect officials to represent us. That's why it is a representative democracy. We have the power to put people in place that should work on behalf of our best interests. A federal republic, all right, the power of the central government is restricted by the states or the provinces, do have some form of self-government, and ultimate power is held by the voters. A confederation is a combination of representative and direct democracy. Another way of thinking about democracy is rule by many. So, by definition, a democracy is a government in which the supreme power is held by the people. Here are some examples of a democracy: constitutional monarchy, direct democracy like we saw in ancient Greece, and a parliamentary democracy. Rule by a few. An oligarchy is an example of this. A government by the few, sometimes a government in which a small group exercises total control over their population. A lot of times they are corrupt and selfish. Okay, communism, totalitarianism, military dictatorships, and a theocracy are an example of ruling by few, all right? And think about China, think about Libya, Iran, etc. Rule by one is an autocracy, okay? Auto meaning one. So an autocrat or an autocratic government is ruled by one. So it's a form of government in which one person possesses unlimited power and the citizens have little role in government, okay? This is an absolute monarchy. This is also known as a dictatorship. All of these things basically mean the same thing. Here are some common terms. You have a federal republic, you have a confederation, you have an Islamic republic, you have a people's republic, and a democratic republic. If you want to pause the video right here and jot this down, go ahead. Bonus fact time. Since 1968, fewer than 150 people have denaturalized or been stripped of their US citizenship. The most common reason for denaturalization or being stripped of citizenship is committing fraud during the naturalization process. Thanks for hanging out for episode 3 of Civics IQ. Episode 4 is coming next week and you do not want to miss it. I'll see you in the next one.